record to the cloud. Great. Awesome. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to Navigating the Great Pause. My name is Vickie Gibbs, and I'm the Executive Director for the Entrepreneurship Center here at Keenan Flagler. And we are co-sponsoring and co-promoting this series with NC Growth. Both of us are centers associated with the Keenan Institute as well as Keenan Flagler Business School. And this series we are putting together as a service to the community. So entrepreneurs, business leaders, nonprofit leaders, and the community during this time of the coronavirus. During this time, we know everyone is a little bit out of sorts, and we're all trying to navigate it together. And so what we've done is we've put on this series every week starting in April. This is our first one in May. We decided to continue it because we're still all in it. And the focus is really, how do we bring stabilization? How do we bring calm? And how do we help navigate this time together so that as we turn to thinking about the reboot, we can really do so most effectively. And as we know, as entrepreneurs and business leaders, you don't have success by yourself. So happy to have y'all as a part of this community. So today our title is Preparing for the Big Reboot, Self-Care for Yourself and Your Team. So as entrepreneurs and business leaders, a lot of times we deal with stressful situations, right? But a lot of times those stressful situations are just within our company, right? What's interesting about this time is that it's not just your company, but it's everything else around you. It's your family, it's your community, it's your neighbors. And so what we have here today is some wonderful CEOs and founders that have done this multiple times, and we're going to be learning from them, hearing advice, and then they're going to be available for questions. So a couple of housekeeping details. You know, if you're not the panelist, please keep yourself on mute. If you move rooms, turn off your video so that's not distracting for folks, but otherwise we love to see your faces. And if you have questions, please put them into the chat room. And then we have Keisha and Callie from the Entrepreneurship Center. The three of us are monitoring it, and we'll get those questions to the panelists. So without further ado, thank you to panelists. Thank you to Scott. Scott's our moderator. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Vickie. I appreciate it. I have loved doing these sessions with Keenan Flagler. I love how many people are jumping on these calls. The numbers are going up. I'm looking at participant count now, and it's going up as we speak. So I really appreciate the kind of reach that we're having. And wow, we've got an incredible group of panelists here. How fortunate are we to be able to get a little bit of information that they walk around within their head all the time today. So as Vickie mentioned, I'm going to be the moderator today. I'm on the Entrepreneurship Center staff as a professor of practice for entrepreneurial leadership. I also run an executive coaching and culture consulting business. So this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart, this idea of how leaders can take care of themselves so that they can take care of their people and their company and get their best results. So today we have four panelists, Bill Spruill, Susan Acker-Walsh, Aaron Houghton, and Paul Krause. And I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves and kick this off. And let's do it by alphabetical order by first name. So Aaron, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Scott. Yeah, thanks for having me. This is really exciting. Anytime I get an opportunity to speak to a Carolina audience, it is a thrill. And especially the Entrepreneurship Center. I feel like entrepreneurs are my people, and this group at Carolina is all of my people. So it's great to be here. And thanks to Vickie for putting this together, Scott moderating, and Ted Zoller, the world's Uber connector, for getting me connected in this group. So thank you so much. This idea of a culture of self-care is really important to me. It's something I've been thinking about a lot the last couple of years and working on a lot. And I've actually created a new company around this topic. And so I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a second. But I want to share some about my own experience as an entrepreneur. So I really know very little else other than entrepreneurship. I started my first companies in high school before coming to Carolina. I was at Carolina from 99 to 03. And in the state of North Carolina from that period on, started 11 software companies over 20 years. And grew one of them called iContact, became a bit of a North Carolina name for a couple years there, to 350 employees. And I sold it in 2012 for $169 million. So it was a banner exit for the state of North Carolina, and just an incredible story for what we can do in the Southeast to build businesses to a national and global scale. And along the way in that journey, I experienced a great deal of personal strife just as a founder. Anxiety, mood swings from high to low, from manic excitement to creativity, down to depression and self-judging and self-doubting what I had created just the hours or days before. And at age 28 years old, I was actually even diagnosed with stage 4 metastatic cancer. I had my surgery, a 10-hour surgery and radiation treatments at UNC as I was living in Chapel Hill still at the time. And as an entrepreneur, I suffered in silence, like so many entrepreneurs do. I shared almost none of that personal side of the story with anybody, including my wife, my closest friends. I kept the personal pain really to myself. So after I sold in 2012, the next couple of years that followed were a really big turning point for me. I had to come to the realization that my company was gone, but the habits that I built under the pressure of building this company were still with me. And in 2014, I had a panic attack that I still remember like it's this moment now. And I'd had a few while running my business under the pressure of it. But now here I am living in this huge house in Chapel Hill that I bought after my exit, and laying on the floor of my home office and just staring at the ceiling fan as it spins around. And I am completely overtaken with anxiety. My chest is tight, my back is tight. I literally can't get off the floor. And this was my rock bottom moment, my moment of epiphany and discovery, to realize that it was going to be a long road back to healthy again. I had sold my company and my company was gone, but all the negative habits that I built over the years while running this company had actually become part of me, and they stayed with me. So I started sharing my story with other entrepreneurs. I had told the story of the exit and building this company and building a team so many times. And honestly, I felt like a bit of a fraud, because on the inside, I felt panicked and terrified, and I felt weak, and I felt like I wasn't the person that should be building this company if I felt this way. And as I started to share the story with people, I got these incredible responses from other founders. They would just open up and say, oh my gosh, like I've been experiencing the same thing. No one's talking about this. Like I couldn't even get a word in edgewise. People would just start to share, this is what I'm feeling. This is what happened to me recently. I ended up in the hospital thinking I was having a heart attack. Turns out it was just a panic attack. Is that something that other entrepreneurs have too? And so the universal story that I discovered through this process is that entrepreneurs are suffering in the same way that I suffered. This is a universal experience. And why is this so important? Well, I think it's because entrepreneurs are who we expect to move the world forward, right? We're the creators, the innovators, the change makers. Thousands of us line up every year and start new companies, willing subjects for the experience. And we create millions of jobs which drive the global economy. We are critical, and keeping ourselves healthy and keeping other people keeping us healthy is critical to the outcomes that we want to create. Unfortunately, these traits that make us so brilliant and make us willing to sign up and take the risk of creating a company actually leave us predisposed to all sorts of really serious challenges. And the data around this is a little bit scary. So 49% of entrepreneurs experience lifetime mental illness issues. That means before they started their company, and like myself, after they sold their company or exited their company or moved on to their next chapter. And I think the most incredible stat, get ready for this, entrepreneurs are 11 times more likely than the general population to be bipolar. Not 11% more, that's 11x, 1100% more likely to be bipolar. These mood swings from high to low, this is just the normal experience for people like us. And it makes us really vulnerable to the stress and pressure of the businesses that we create. It causes us to start them, and then we get in the mix, and it can cause us to collapse, and we suffer in silence. And so this experience was really hard to hear. I came to the conclusion that I had to help other people and make this journey easier on other founders. So I took what I learned through this process. This is 5 years in now, just sharing my story and hearing stories from other founders. And I created a company because I'm an entrepreneur. That's what I know how to do. So I created a company to give back and to try and make a difference among people like me, among founders. It's called Founders First System. And the entire goal of this framework we built is to help keep founders healthy, happy, and high performance as they build their companies. And if you think about it, there's hundreds of frameworks for businesses out there. This is the first framework for optimizing the founder and keeping the founder healthy. If we fail, our businesses fail. And we know that's a reality. So we launched a workshop in the month of April for Founders First. It's called the Founder Resilience Workshop. We're doing it, we intended to do it in person across the country, and we're doing it just like this over Zoom. It's a full-day workshop program with founders from all around the country, and we've filled all 4 courses in April. So it's very clear that the founder world is just really hungry for this cultural shift towards self-care and taking care of ourselves. One of the things I like to ask in the workshop is, what are you willing to give up in order to be successful? And I go as far as actually saying to people, it's kind of it might be a mean question, but I think it's really true. I ask, would you, for $1 million cash right now, give up 5 years off the end of your life? Not now, but 5 years off the end of your life. And how about for $10 million? If I could guarantee you, you'd make $10 million from your business, would you give up 10 years off the end of your life? And the reality is, if we just grind and grind on our businesses, this is what we're going to give up. We may actually lose it all. And it might not just be 5 years off the end. It might be 5 years from now. So it doesn't have to be this way. I'm here to make this journey easier on founders. Self-care is really relevant to us as founders, but also to our teams, right? So the cultures that we create in our companies spread across the entire business. And if we start with a culture of self-care for ourselves, our co-founders, and our management teams, it can spread to the rest of the company, and we can make a huge difference in how people treat themselves in this high-risk startup world. So the fact that the Entrepreneurship Center is having this conversation today and talking about self-care for teams and a culture of self-care means we're really at an inflection point. If we can empower entrepreneurs, we know that we can keep them healthy and happy so they can do it again and again and again and change the world. So I'm so excited to be here. I just want to help however I can and really look forward to this conversation. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Aaron, very much. Compelling story. Bill, would you like to go next?
Yeah, how does one follow that? First of all, I'll echo much of what Aaron said around happy to be here today, especially with my Carolina community. So I won't continue down that particular path. You know, my name is Bill Sproul. I currently run a company called Global Data Consortium. We focus on international identity verification. And typically on any given year, I log about 150,000 miles flying globally. And so you can imagine what the Great Pause has done for that for me thus far. Is one of many different changes that have occurred over the past few months. I've been in the Triangle community in the tech space for well over 25, 30 years now. I was one of the first employees at CED, employee number 5 there. So that tells you how far back in time I go in this particular community. And during my time here, I've seen a number of interesting pauses occur along the way, whether it was the Web 1.0 meltdown, where everything dried up on the funding side and companies fell aside almost immediately from funding starvation, to 9/11, where I was working actually at SAS, where I had taken, I sometimes say refuge from the Web 1.0 storm. I was working at SAS when everything happened there. And again, that was another pause that occurred in life, to the financial crisis that occurred some years later, where you could see it coming, but it was a slow-moving train wreck. And the anxiety I experienced was, does not anyone else see this? Or, you know, how are we going to deal with this? And then the train hit, and we dealt with the aftermath of that. And even to today, and all in the background of that, something I always have to remind others is, oh, by the way, I was a gay African-American trying to actually be impactful in the tech startup community in the South. So guess what? Stress has been there since day one when I started this journey, and it is, these pauses just add inflection points along the way. So my story, different from Aaron's, but we share lots of common points along the way. We have these points of anxiety that hit us for varying reasons, whether it's internal family issues coming from rural North Carolina, to questioning, why am I doing this? I have multiple degrees. I could just go get a job somewhere and be satisfied. And the things that drive us as entrepreneurs and founders are because we're not going to just be satisfied. We're always forging ahead, forging new paths, and looking to do different things. So happy to participate today, happy to share more stories, and I'll cut that bit off there.
Thank you, Bill. I really appreciate you being here. Paul, will you go next?
Yeah, no, thank you, Scott, and thank you to the extended community here in the Triangle area that's joined in today. My name is Paul Krause. Came, unlike Bill and some others, a little bit newer to the Triangle area, relocated here 6 years ago. I had been based in Chicago for much of my life. I came with Chancellor Folt, where I consulted with her when she was at Dartmouth College. My professional work has centered on organizational design and development. Sometimes that looks like executive coaching. Sometimes that looks like facilitation around leadership or strategy. But that's kind of been my background. I had a great experience when I came initially to Carolina in working with the athletic department. There was an academic issue that needed some attention, that had some priorities in some areas around athletics, and got a chance to work with our athletic director, Bubba Cunningham, and his extended team. And that helped me to see the priority and the opportunity that athletics provides in the lives of our students. As a student at the University of Illinois, being on a basketball court was nowhere in my experience. And in the context of working with athletics here at Carolina, worked on a data analytics initiative that Carolina allows Carolina to have a little bit improved targeted marketing for our fans around tickets and the opportunities for development and advancement. And that impetus led to the founding of a company that I am a co-founder in, Fanalytical. We provide university athletic departments with an integrated view of their fans, and enables them to do more effective campaigns, whether around ticketing, merchandise, or donations. And it's been a thrill to be a part of that founding and all the energy that comes from that, and all the challenges that presents. And probably like a lot of you today, I'm looking at pro forma plans that we had put in place, and our board was signed up for. Our last board meeting was February 24th. And by March 24th, the sporting world had changed. And trying to navigate that personally while offering authenticity and credibility to my colleagues has required some leadership for me that sometimes in normal days isn't necessary. So it's been a real privilege to be here and to try to learn alongside. I assume, Scott, that we'll get into some of our learning points in self-care in a few moments, but that gives you a little bit of background in terms of why I'm here. But again, it's an honor. When I look at a lot of faces here, had Vickie called any of you, I'm sure you could have brought a point of view that we would have all benefited from. So thanks for the opportunity to present today.
Thanks, Paul. And Susan, obviously you're next. Before Susan gets started, I just want to sort of put the audience on alert that we're going to be taking questions, and the best way to do that is to feed them into the chat, and then the team from the Entrepreneurship Center will filter those to us through the chat. So start typing those questions in as you have them. Susan.
Thank you so much, Scott and Vickie, and to the greater UNC community, and a lot of familiar faces online. Really appreciate the opportunity to be with all of you today. So I'm Susan Acker-Walsh. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Krause. We're a Durham-based innovative management consulting firm working with healthcare, life sciences, and technology services firms. I'm also a proud graduate of the Keenan Flagler Business School's Executive MBA program, a certified executive coach out of NC State. I've been a serial entrepreneur with over 30 years of experience in population health, drug development, global health, and technology leadership roles, including a local company here many of you may have known called Constella Group, which had a really nice exit about 15 years ago. One of the things that's been important at Krause as we've been navigating this time has been to take stock of our own team, how are folks doing, and really checking in. And early on, as speaking from the I position, I found myself struggling to figure out where I was in time and space relative to all that was going on around me. How could I best support not only my family and my loved ones, but my team at Krause? What was the role that I was going to be playing there as a leader? And one of my colleagues, Patrick Curran, and I, he oversees our leadership and organizational development function in a day-to-day basis. We sat down and said, really, what's our role? How do we help here? And so we tried on a conversation with the Krause team called Courageous Conversations, Building Resilient Leaders During COVID-19. And we got an overwhelmingly positive response from our executive team on the value of this conversation. And then we said, well, part of what we're up to in the world is really to be cause in the matter and to really support teams that are doing mission-focused work, many of them who are on the front lines of healthcare delivery or who are directly supporting COVID-19 efforts. What is our role to play? How do we support them? Because if they're not outfitted for success, we all suffer as a result of that. So we felt like it was an opportunity to engage organizations and their leaders around not only their leadership experiences, but their individual experiences to see where they were in time and space during this unprecedented time. And we really utilized this time with them. These are formed as complimentary 90-minute sessions to really go in and just talk with them about what are they doing for themselves to adapt to the current state, and how are they demonstrating resilience during this time, really putting their own oxygen mask on before helping others. And it has been just an amazing opportunity to work across many different leadership teams to see how leaders are responding during this time. And I will tell you, both as a leader, as someone who's been engaged in these conversations, and as executive coaches, it's been phenomenal to see the challenges that people are traversing and the fortitude with which they have outfitted themselves to both adapt immediately to the crisis, but also to deal with all that they're dealing with in their life, in their homes, in their work. And just to put a finer point on it, as an executive coach, I've never seen people more stressed and on edge than I've seen in the last 5 or 6 weeks collectively. It has been really remarkable. So, as we think about this broader global health and human calamity, today, 3.8 million people infected, 1.2 million of them in the US, 265,000 global deaths, 73,000 in the US, 25,000 new cases daily in the US. What we're trying to do is not just focus on the death and despair, but to really look at the global connectedness that's coming from this, right? There's sort of this beautiful silver lining inside of this that connects us all going through this common experience, whether it's people singing on balconies in Italy or applauding healthcare workers across the globe, or creative musical mashups and choral groups or clearer skies. We're seeing all these other elements that are occurring. And as we're having these conversations, what we're trying to make clear to leaders is that this experience is literally seared into our consciousness. Like other calamities or challenges that we've dealt with, whether it's Hurricane Katrina or a 9/11 type of disaster, we are all altered forever as a result of this. And the way that we're treating ourselves, the way that we're treating others, the way people treat us will never be forgotten. So this is a time to lead with both empathy and compassion, to kind of load up on these skills as we go through this time together. And also to encourage leaders to do a couple things that we don't always do very well. One is to sit with the ambiguity, which is the unknown, and to be with that while also self-reflecting, all right? This gives us this opportunity, this great pause to take a moment to self-reflect as leaders, so that as we go through this journey, we can grab a hold of what's been happening during this period of time with so much disequilibrium, and find how we change through this time. I've been asking folks, what is it that you really want to save from this time? right? Because it's not just about being resilient and putting your head down and toughing it out and bouncing back, but it's how do you as an organization want to be resilient? How do you want to adapt to this change? And what things do you want to remember out of this? Because there have been some positive things that have really come from it. And then I'll close by saying that there have been 3 really important structural frameworks that we have used in our conversations with leaders. One is a framework that McKinsey has put out there. We're calling it the 5 R's framework, which really encourages everything from resolve to reimagination and reform as key steps along the way for leaders. We've been using the Kubler-Ross grief curve to really kind of pinpoint our collective grief and our individual grief. Where are we sitting in time and space with respect to how we're experiencing this time, and encouraging leaders to open up and to share their emotions about what they're experiencing so that they can actually move through these grief curves and encourage their teams to get through these grief curves so that we can actually find meaning and find where the light is at the end of the tunnel. And then finally, I would say Maslow's hierarchy of needs has been something that has been very present to me, and I've seen it in the organizations we've been working with, which is, if you don't feel safe or you're dealing with, basic physical needs not being met, finding places where you love and belong, or esteeming yourself or being self-actualized don't really matter, right? So we've really got to find and meet people where they are in this journey as leaders, as we're working with our communities, our families, our employees. So I think it's a really interesting time for us to pause and to take the best out of this as we lead forward. Let me pause there, Scott, and hand the floor back to you.
Oh, that was great. That was absolutely great. There are questions pouring in. I have a couple I'd like to ask myself. And the big one for me is, I guess, centered around the legend of what a great entrepreneur is, and how that impacts your mental health. As simple as that, right? It's that we have this image of what a great entrepreneur is that's built around these stereotypes of larger than life figures, and there's no point in even naming them all here, right? There's too many to name, but we all know what we're thinking about. This creative genius who works 18 to 20 hour days and seems to operate without sleep or food. And how much pressure does that put on an entrepreneur, and how do you fight that image as being the one that you have to live up to? And I'll just open that to any of the panelists to answer.
Well, I mean, I'm looking at our panelists. I think Aaron has probably the deepest experience given what he's done professionally since navigating his recent exit. But let me come at it from a quick point of view, Scott. About a decade ago, I was sitting around a campfire with a cousin of mine and my kids, and he had what I think is the best job in the world. He took families and company leadership teams out into the woods of northern Canada to get them lost. And he got paid to do it. I mean, my kids would tell you, I do it for free. But his purpose was to help these individuals experience, in a very disequilibrium sort of environment, experience leadership and see how it emerged in that environment. And I think of that conversation in terms of what he looked for. And he introduced me at the time, about a decade ago, to a phrase that has become part of our common lexicon, which is learning agility. Learning agility is that capacity that we each have around learning from our environment and rapidly pivoting when things are changing. And learning agility basically has 4 elements to it, 3 of which are, I think, always present in entrepreneurs. First element is around innovating. That is, questioning the status quo, challenging assumptions, discovering new ways to do things. I think we got a room or a Zoom full of people that are innovators. The second attribute is they're willing to take risks. They put themselves out there. They put their financial lives out there. They pioneer, they move into new territory. And the third attribute that I think is consistent across entrepreneurs that it relates to learning agility is around performing. They push toward goals. They handle stress really well. They adapt quickly. Those 3 attributes that I think are common in entrepreneurs aren't necessarily the things that are going to carry us through this experience. And so, when you're a hammer, everything's a nail. Some of our learned behaviors underperform us during this period. And I think that speaks to the fourth element of learning agility and some of what I think Susan referenced, and that's the opportunity around reflecting. To reflect on experiences, to get feedback, to pause, and to learn. And in my view, I'm a fast forward person. I have no problem working, as hard as the next person, if not more, coming up with ideas and taking risks. But reflecting is a real challenge for me in pausing. And I have never gone through a 2-month period that has caused me to need to pause and reflect like this one. So what's coming up in that? One thing that is helping me through this period, and I recognize as I look at this room on this Zoom call, many of you probably have some really good disciplines around yoga and mindfulness and so forth. That's not necessarily where I go. When I reflect, first thing I reflect on is the why for what I'm doing. What was the purpose for which I founded Fanalytical? Because what happens is usually there's a core idea, and for me, it was to create opportunity for student athletes. That purpose, that why, is still present. It's everything that came after that why that's at risk right now. The pro forma financial statements that we are not going to hit this year. The challenges around maintaining consistent employment for our extended team. The pipeline that disappeared overnight. The clients that are having concerns about their viability and so forth. So, a lot of the things that I added on over time as an entrepreneur have gone away. So to remind myself, first thing I reflect on is my reason why. Second thing, and this was a colleague of mine who was the president of sales at Ford on 9/11. One thing he reminded me of is the importance of taking the long view. Because when you're in the moment, it's difficult to see to see what's happening. And I appreciate Susan's observation around the Kubler-Ross and the meaning making, but it's to recognize that this too shall pass. If it was a poster in your mom's 1970s kitchen, it's probably wisdom that you need to learn from today, right? This too shall pass, or make lemon from lemonade. Those cliches become part of our lexicon because they resonate with our human experience. And one thing I'm realizing that this will not last forever. And so I reflect on the why. I seek to take a long-term perspective. And the other thing that I'm doing is this is a great season to level up. That is, to get new skills. I have never been invited to so many free Zoom calls as I have in the last 6 weeks. And many, like on the opportunity with today, although I like listening to the other panelists more than hear myself talk because I can learn. But this has been a great window to get wisdom and insights from different perspectives. Not every Zoom call I show up on resonates with me, but many of them have an aspect of truth that's relevant. The old phrase is, when you're hungry, any meal will be satisfying. And right now, I'm hungry for insight and perspective. And I'm finding that many of these different learning experiences I'm invited to have a nugget that I need that helps move me forward. So again, just going back to where I started, learning agility will carry us through this. But I think an important part is to take time to reflect and to pause and not simply just try to perform, innovate, and risk, but actually pause and learn from the situation and ask, what's in it for me and where do I go next?
That's great. Thanks, Paul. From any other panelists, what are your thoughts on this idea of, Aaron, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. Paul, I always wondered where, like all things, this too shall pass came from. And my dad taught me that when I was a teenager in hard times. So it was probably his parents' side of the refrigerator. All right, I love it. So I think this is a huge part of what leads to the imposter syndrome that you hear so many entrepreneurs starting to talk about in the last couple of years, where the experience that they have to project, or they feel like they have to project to the outside world, is so different than the actual experience for us in the moment. We feel, we're strapped into this roller coaster car of this emotional roller coaster ride of entrepreneurship. And when we're on the uptick, it isn't like a roller coaster slowly like tick, tick, ticking up. It's like a rocket ship taking off. We're excited, things are happening, we're getting confirmation from the world that everything's going really, really well. And then we eventually just run out of the energy that it takes to sustain once all of our adrenaline's pumped out, and we hit the plateau at the top, and then we start the drop down. And that is much like a real roller coaster. It's fast, your stomach is up in your chest, and you're wondering how far the drop can continue to go, right? And can I turn, is there a bottom? Like, you often can't see the bottom as you start the way back down. Yet to the public, we're just simply talking about the milestones. We're talking about what it's like to be on that upswing where it's exciting and everything's going well. I always like to say, everything's going great, just ask us, right? Because that's just how we're tuned to respond as an entrepreneur. And I think there's so much value in, first, just among our entrepreneurial peers, right? It's scary to think about, like, I might go into a board meeting and explain that I don't feel prepared to make decisions alongside the board today because I don't feel mentally in a place to do that, right? Like, that's something I would have been terrified to admit. And even now, the thought of that is scary. So I think that starting that conversation across entrepreneurs first is probably the most important place to do it, especially those of us that, aren't even in business together, right? We're just here, we're in the same experience together. We can help each other in ways that are really, really fantastic. So calls like this, I think, are incredible. The online community that we've just launched this week is meant to do just that. And then there's other great organizations out there like EO, which is Entrepreneurs Organization. They have a program called Accelerator that starts for businesses with just 250,000 annual revenue, and helps them try and get over that $1 million mark to qualify for EO proper. There's groups for other companies like Vistage and YPO as well. So anywhere you can find that peer group of entrepreneurs, I think, is absolutely incredible. And then I'll share just one tool that I teach in our Founders First System workshop, which is around identity. And right now is a great opportunity in this pause to work on this, because we've been kind of violently shaken out of our normal routines, and we're sitting here looking around at new time in our schedules. That isn't necessarily a good thing in a lot of ways, but it also creates some opportunities for us. And our identity tool that I teach is around starting with your identity as an entrepreneur, and then just journaling, like do it on a sheet of paper or in your head, journaling each of your other identities that you hold as a human being. So I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a skier, I'm a mountain biker, I'm a camper, I'm a friend, I'm an advisor, let's see, I'm a grandson. I'm trying to think of all of the different identities I hold. So come up with them and think about the activities that you do inside of each of those identities. And are you serving them now? Are you serving those identities with enough time from your schedule? And it's hard to look at this when everything's going normally, especially when things are going great in business, because we get this validation that, the harder I work, the more awards I win, and the more accolades we get, and the more the media writes about us and says how smart we are, and then revenue goes up. And so I should keep just serving my entrepreneur identity. The reality is that over time, that just creates a huge void and a huge weakness in us as people. And it did for me as an entrepreneur. I now become terrified that if my business fails, my entire identity is on the line. I've got nothing else to fall back on. I haven't been serving those other identities. So I loved in the survey responses from folks that are on this call today, people sharing they're spending more time to walk. I think someone said they're walking 3 miles a day. People are cooking home cooked meals. People are exercising more than they have before. And that's proof that this great pause is causing us to have this opportunity to break out of our patterns and start to serve our other identities.
Hey, Scott, I'll jump in real quick on that. I'll give one contrasting point here. Well, one point. I think it's really important for everyone to keep things in context. For myself as a founder, mentor, the thing that really resonates for me is context here. The other thing, and what I mean by context is what we're going through now is difficult. But one of the data points I like to share with people and have been doing recently is the fact that 5 million people annually in Africa die from starvation. So yes, this is a big issue, but let's keep these things in context. I spend a lot of time with my family. Anyone who knows me well knows that for years, over 15 years, I travel down to see my mom in Goldsboro every other weekend and sit with her typically on Sundays. And that's because she's bedridden and has dementia. And so she has been in this state for 15 years, and I've spent time every other week to go down and sit with her. Nothing keeps you better grounded than to see what other people are also going through. And that's what helps me sort of keep the lid on, yeah, things might be bad in the business periodically, but are things really that bad? So I think it's important to talk about context. The other thing I actually want to disabuse us of in the group today is the notion of this is a pause. It's actually not a pause. It's a reallocation of time. The world's still spinning. Sun, rose this morning. It'll set this evening. And the world is still spinning. But we are reallocating our time differently now than we were before. So there's not a pause button as much as this is an opportunity for you to reallocate your time, whether through mandatory things like shelter in place or through mindful things like saying, how do I better virtualize my workforce and onboard teams? You need to think about how to take advantage of this as opposed to just sort of saying this is a timeout. It's a time forward in my mind. So I just wanted to share those really quickly and keep us moving. And I also like to be controversial as well. So there we go.
I would add one other thought to this, that leaders go first, and so if you're modeling how this is occurring for you as a leader, I've been trying to speak this from the I position, and I'll share with you the first 2 weeks of this time I was sick. I wasn't sure whether I had COVID or not. There were no tests to be tested. I was ill. I was quarantined from my family in my own home, and I was scared. And after that experience, I spent the next, week or more feeling really constrained, really unfocused, and really tired. Someone who's existed on 6 hours or less of sleep for the last 25 years, getting more sleep than I'd ever gotten, just feeling out of sorts, unfocused, unable to really move things forward. And the thing that was clear for me was that I needed to shift myself before I could help shift my organization. And so it was beginning to look forward in new ways. What could I do for myself to reinvest in my own skills? I've read more books and I've done more things around the house that have felt great. But when I started to get clear about a path forward that would work for me, I found my own focus return. And thankfully, I work in an organization, many of the Creo team are on the phone today, that are just fantastic people. And we have a set of core values that allow us to really be frank and honest and to tell the truth with one another. And hopefully that modeling has been available for others to be able to say how they're feeling and what they've needed to be able to move things forward. And it's been inside of that conversation that a lot more clarity has appeared for me. And I've been able to let go of some of that. What I understand now was grief about the change that was occurring to all of us that we couldn't really control. There are new ways of driving the business forward, but I think we have to see ourselves as entrepreneurs. While we have the power to create things and to generate ideas and to bring them forward, no team is successful as a force of one, right? We're part of something bigger, and it's okay to be honest with ourselves and with others around us. That makes us more credible, more authentic, and more capable of leading. And I hope everyone here will invite yourself and your colleagues to speak from the I position about what's going on with you, and be okay that this might be messy and doesn't necessarily have a bow around it on any given day. We're all evolving through this process together.
I love this idea of being open. When I'm coaching leaders, it's one of the things that I really push them to do. And another thing that I really like to press leaders to do is to think about very practical things they can do. So, I'd like to ask each of the panelists to make some suggestions, whether that's from your own experience, practical things that you have done to take care of yourself, to put yourself in the best possible condition, mentally, physically, to lead, or whether it's things that you've seen other leaders do. But some very practical tips for the people on the call today. How are they going to manage their stress? I mean, there are people, like one person has asked, how are we going to deal with the stress of getting the company back up and running and figuring out how to exist after this is all over with, if this is all over with, right? So I think it's a pretty important question is how do we manage that stress? What are the practical things we can do?
So for me, I can give you a great visual representation right there. It's called a step bench. It's here in the office with me. It's great because frankly, physical health is important for me. I'm recovering from a torn patella tendon that occurred about 2 years ago on a business trip, which required me to have, fly 8 hours back home with a leg and a brace, and then to have immediate surgery. And then it's been a bit of a 2-year rehab period. Now, the interesting thing about this reallocation of time for me is that I've actually had more consistent time to actually focus on just rehabbing my knee. So literally, I've done more in the rehab in the last 2 months than I did for the last year and a half or so, going through the process of, once a week meeting my PT. So that's just a great, practical example. Order it on Amazon, costs you $40, and you can do steps all day in between emails and so forth. The other thing I'd share is I do walking socially distant meetings at the North Carolina Museum of Art on the walking trails there. And it's great. I did one with Vic. And you can spread out, you can have great conversation, you can get outside. It's springtime and it's a perfect time to be out walking around and actually get some good time in with colleagues, co-workers, or people who are important in your life. So those are 2 very quick points I'd share.
I love it. Exercise has been, I'm not much of an exerciser under normal conditions, but it's been a savior for me. I love riding my bike, and thank God, if this has got to happen, that it's happening in spring rather than the dead of winter, so that we can at least get out and enjoy some of that exercise. That's fantastic. What about from other panelists? Some practical tips.
Well, this is not so much self-care, or maybe it is, playing games. I have 4 children, 3 of whom are in college or graduate school, so they're all back and doing the learning, the distance learning. And it's game night every evening. Settlers of Catan in one room, there's Scrabble in another. We've got a puzzle set up. And I have found more intentional conversations coming up in that context. Similar to Bill, I traveled last year about, 180 days, about 300,000 air miles. I missed a lot. And the last 2 months of not being on a plane has given me a connection with my kids that I just didn't anticipate. I kind of thought that those days were over. So again, I know the broader context is quite difficult, but games and play has been a key part. And I'm one of those guys that figured out how to make bread. So you can mock me for that. In fact, I got the sourdough yeast kit arrive. So excited about unpacking that. But what I'm driving in this is just things I wouldn't have taken the time in this reallocation of time. I love Bill's way of reframing that. And I'm reallocating time to some things and pursuits that maybe wouldn't have made it on the top of the list with the previous pace and urgency.
Paul, I can't mock you for that. This is my grandfather's recipe for bread, and I'm going to make it as soon as I can find yeast, which is almost as rare as toilet paper.
Could you put that closer so I can get the screenshot of that? Come on. Okay, here we go. Oh, hiding your dad's recipe. I gotta
hide my granddaddy's recipe. It's a treasured family secret.
Perfect.
Any other tips from the panel?
Yeah, I would share just 2. I've tried to actually hold a slightly higher standard for myself in this time. I'm a huge believer that what we do in the moments when the world isn't watching, or the moments of where we fall out of our routine, right? I think it's easy, especially I have generally poor discipline myself. And so I look for opportunities in this to increase discipline a little bit, because I would say, the world's just changed, and I'm going to watch 6 hours of Netflix to make myself feel better, right? Or, maybe I'm going to have 3 glasses of wine tonight because I deserve more than the normal one, right? Because, things are just really tough right now. And so I've tried to flip it on its head a little bit and say, I want to tell myself that this is going to be okay. A bit of it is reassurance by saying I'm going to hold a higher standard now. to help me get through this. One, to just deal with every minute of uncertainty and every day when I wake up and check the COVID curve and see if that sucker's flattened out yet and if it's going back down. But for me, that's been, I normally have a great deal of time exercising outside. I'm here in Boulder, Colorado, and we have these skinny single track hiking trails everywhere with 4 million people all trying to hike on them right now. So you literally cannot social distance and be outside because we have such an active culture here. And so it's actually pushed me a little more inside than I would normally be. And a couple of my founder friends actually came up with the idea to do a competitive ride on Peloton, on the Peloton bike system. And so we do it every Tuesday, Thursday morning. I just got off of it this morning, and I'm actually showing up, one, because I know my friends are there. There's some social pressure around it that's helped, which is different than I usually have. And two, it's competitive, and I'm an entrepreneur and I love competition. So I'm racing and trying to beat these other folks on the call while, creating a pool of sweat underneath me. And then the second thing, to go back to my alcohol point, I think it's worth addressing. I was on with our last April workshop group for Founders First System. And I was shocked to see that we had 8 founders in that cohort across the country, and half of them had significantly reduced their alcohol intake. I had shared that I'd actually done the same. So I actually own part of a brewery. I love craft beer. You'll find me sitting outside on a beautiful day, having 1 or 2 at least on an evening to just enjoy the evening. And that's kind of part of what I've done with my friends for years. And so I pulled that number actually way down. I think in the month of April, I think I had 2 drinks. They were Lone Rider beers, so great local brewery in North Carolina. But just 2. I pulled it way down, and that's serving me as well. I'm sleeping a little better. I'm waking up with a little more energy in the morning, and so those are the changes I've made.
No, I'd add to that. For me, balance, I always had framed it in my mind as a seductive possibility as an entrepreneur. This thing that was always fleeting, but you could never attain it. And I think maybe somehow I was in the business of fooling myself that there really was more balance available, but it was just the way I was making my choices. So, some very sort of pedestrian things, which have been really important and really powerful. When I asked my family recently, what were some of the things that we didn't want to have go back to normal, or as we defined normal before. And my spouse said, I really like having dinner with you every night, right? And my family's able to sit down to dinner together every night and talk about our day and what we're grateful for. Fundamental things like going for evening walks as a family, or I've really enjoyed reconnecting with my siblings. I have 2 sisters, and being able to text with them and share bread recipes or things that we've made, or just to kind of keep up with the news. There's a deeper sense of connection and connectedness, even though we're separate, right? So that sort of dissonance of there's more connectedness while we're apart in some ways has been really an interesting time. And as we've worked with the courageous conversations that I shared earlier, I'm hearing from executive teams that they have, in some cases, the strongest pipeline they've ever had, that their BD teams are more productive, and they're wondering if they should put people back on airplanes again like they did before. They're having record months and in the worst possible time. Their forecast is getting stronger. So there's something that's going on inside of all of this that we all need to, again, going back to what you were saying, Paul, pause and reflect on, right? Because we want to grab a hold of those things that we can change and we can take out of this that make us even more resilient as individuals and as leaders going forward. And we have a moment in time now to think about that and to determine for ourselves and for our organizations we lead and the communities that we support how we want to be in the world and who we want to be in the world, and let that being define the doing and the having. And I think if we do that, we will create some really positive change out of this situation.
That's fantastic. And I want to put the panel on alert that I'm going to be asking for your final thoughts here in just a second. Before we do, a couple of mentions so far about the importance of reflection and some practical ways of doing that have been mentioned, journaling. And I'll tell you that I have started practicing what I preach more often. I'm always talking to my clients about the importance of reflection. Our coaching hours are one form of that reflection. but I've started going back to keeping a written journal into the week. I close out my work week. It's also a way for me to actually close out the work week and actually go into a weekend when we're in this weird situation where time has no meaning. But I close it out by answering 3 questions: what, so what, and now what. It's what did I get accomplished this week? What were the nuts and bolts? So what was what did I learn? And now what is what am I going to do differently going forward based on what I learned? So that's a thing that may be helpful to you. From our panel, and we'll start with Bill. Final thoughts?
Sure. I'll just 2 thoughts. One is sort of paraphrasing an old Darwin theme. It's not the strongest or the most intelligent. It's the most adaptable that survives. So absolutely look to be adaptive as things change. And then point number 2 is something I blogged about yesterday, is see the truth of the situation in front of you and just make the change. Don't hesitate. Don't pause. Make the change. I think Delta Airlines is a great example of this, where we know that Warren Buffett dumped all the stocks. Delta said, we know the airline industry is changing. We know that going back to the normal is likely not going to be the thing. And they made a very conscious effort to say, no more. They stepped out first, said, no more middle seats. We're going to do these things. And I suspect you're going to see more innovation, because that's what it is. They're going to change their business model so they can get other travelers like myself and others back on their planes in a safe manner as soon as we can. So see the truth, acknowledge it, and then embrace and change and be adaptable along the way.
I love that. How about you, Susan?
I think many of you have probably seen Covey's work on the circle of control, and really kind of looking at those things that are, your worries and concerns, and the things that you can actually influence, and then the places that you really want to get committed, where you can intentionally put your energy. And when we're talking about resiliency, we're looking at your energy capacity and your energy consumption and managing that. So as leaders, we can't do something about everything, but we can go all in on the fewest most important things that have the greatest impact. And now more than ever, we need to be laser focused on the fewest most important things that really have the greatest impact on our lives, on our businesses, on our communities, and let this noise that's died down allow us to create greater focus.
Fantastic. Aaron.
Yeah, I would just like to leave the final thought that I think that we've been doing, the reason why we suffer as entrepreneurs is because we've been kind of doing it wrong all this time. We've been optimizing around the wrong variable. And so I think this time of change is a great opportunity for us to realize that to create the long-term outcomes we want to create for ourselves and for the world, we need to optimize at the founder level first and at the company level second.
Fantastic. Paul?
Well, if humility is recognizing our weaknesses or the follies around mindset and thinking, vulnerability is bringing that into conversations with others. And I think what I'm learning is, to Susan's point, I thought I had a lot more control over things than I did. And I thought that I was in a much better place and had managed risks better than I did. So that's been humbling. The vulnerability part is bringing that into conversations with colleagues, with our board, with clients, and recognizing it creates a reciprocity of authenticity that I haven't had in a long time. And that has been an amazing outcome from this reallocation of time.
Vulnerability seems like a great place to end this conversation. So thank you for that. Thanks to the panelists. I'm going to turn it back over to Vickie to close us out, but I do want to point out that in the chat, there is a link to a survey. Please let us hear what you're thinking. We're attempting to do these better and better each week, so your opinion really does matter. Vickie, do you want to close us out? You're on pause, Vickie. I mean on mute, yeah.
Yep, my thing just warned me of that. I It's been a long day. Thank you so much, Scott, for moderating. Susan, Bill, Aaron, Paul, thank you so much for being panelists here. This was one of the things we're doing with these sessions is we're keeping it real. And I do hope that that is something that we continue to do as entrepreneurs and as a community as we move forward. One of the things that's been said in previous sessions and was said today is no one reaches success, however you define that, alone. We're going to get through this together, and we'll be in a better place having learned a lot through this process. So thank you so much for being here. Don't miss our session next week. We're going to be talking about pivoting. We have 4 examples from Launch Chapel Hill companies as far as how they've pivoted in creative ways to serve the community in more meaningful ways during this time. So please be there for that. And just thank you so much for being a part of this. Everyone have a great rest of your week. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.